if you're intelligent and hardworking, you figure it out. Like intelligent, hardworking people figure it out, and if you're Baruch, you have reasonable amount of intelligence, if not a great amount of intelligence, right? And hopefully you've got the work ethic that can support that, and if you have those two things, it may not happen for you on the time frame you hope for or in exactly the way that you anticipate, but at some point you are going to figure out what that niche is, and that's obviously our lives are always changing and adapting and so forth. But all the anxieties you have about whether or not you're going to quote unquote make it or do well or whatever, like that's going to happen. If you're intelligent and hardworking, those people always figure it out.
Welcome to CEO Unplugged, the podcast empowering students, starters, and founders through real, unfiltered conversations. This is Startup Talk Unplugged. My name is Nicole. I'm the host, and today we have a very special guest, Professor Cory Labanow. Based off what I've heard from Mark, you're a wonderful person, truly inspirational, and I think you've influenced him in a great way because in your class, people would say you're really relatable because you come from a background that, some of us in Baruch are like first generation students and everything like that. And I really enjoyed the story he told me about how you worked at McDonald's and you didn't even know how to make a sandwich, but now you're like making it in life. I checked your LinkedIn out and I saw that you work in American Express, Goldman Sachs, MasterCard, and those are like really big companies. So perks to you. Congratulations. And
Thank you. It's great to be
yes,
on the podcast today. Really appreciate the invitation.
of course. And if that's okay, you can continue. Like, maybe I didn't touch up your story as well. Like introduce yourself, what you're doing right now and everything like that.
Sure. Well, very nice again to be on the podcast. I love that you started my career at McDonald's. That is where I started my career. I guess one could say at 15 years old in the at a truck stop McDonald's in Ohio, working drive-through. So that was or counter and drive-through. That was my first port of call. And then later I got promoted to work on sandwiches without much effectiveness. So that was the start of my career. But hey, I have kind of an atypical career path because I went to college for something very unrelated to what I do now. At the time, I wanted to be a Christian missionary. I even went to get a PhD in theology. And by the time I was done with that, I sort of stepped back and said, I'm not sure I'm going to do this anymore. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I kind of fell into teaching middle school and in the Bronx. And that was a really neat experience. I had a lot of really wonderful times there. But then during that time, my principal asked me to be the lead of this data inquiry team, which, I think for Baruch students, you would recognize this as a fairly intuitive thing to basically look at data, figure out what you could do better, try some things out, and, assess how that goes. At least in the New York City Department of Education at the time, this was kind of a novel approach to be looking at sort of quantitative data and taking this type of approach. So I was really an entrepreneur, so to speak, within our school and actually even citywide. We were part of a pilot set of schools in this program. Really loved that. Got very, very deeply engaged in it. It sort of caught my interest in a way that classroom teaching to middle school students did not. And I led that team for 3 years and then kind of leveraged that experience into a role at the citywide level, kind of helping to roll this out more broadly. And had some really good experiences at the central level doing sort of policy work and things like that for a few years. But I realized that I wasn't sure that was the long-term place for me. So I did something really, I went back to school, which is not something that I wanted to do at the time, but I went to Columbia Business School and joined their executive MBA program, which was a really fantastic experience. You don't go full-time, you do go full-time pace, but you only go on the weekends. So you kind of cram everything into Friday, Saturday, and had a lot of wonderful experiences there. Sort of toward the end of my time there, I got a role at American Express and worked in a change management team, working on competitive intelligence, worked on a kind of a data cleanup project. Then this role at Goldman Sachs came up in kind of strategic partnerships and working on sort of the infrastructure side of finance, which was had some really interesting things to it. Led a data science team there for a while. And then after that, this role at MasterCard came up in strategy, and I've been there in strategy type roles for 6.5 years ever since.
It's amazing. And actually, I wanted to dig more deeper into like the your role right now, MasterCard,
Sure.
corporate strategy.
Yeah.
I did like some research. I saw it's like growth in businesses. Could you like elaborate more onto that? Because I hope like the students can understand and learn what it is.
Yeah,
I don't know.
absolutely. Absolutely. So I think one of the ways to think uh, about strategy and organizations is that, and again, this can vary depending on what the organization is, but in general, you sort of have a lot of people who are focused on uh, doing stuff kind of right now. It's selling things to make the year-end goals. It's operating products, providing services, and there's always going to be some view of what we do in the future, but really your primary goal is let's operate things well right now and kind of keep things going, right? And then there are sort of pockets of people that are kind of set aside that say, all right, look, you don't have a revenue target for this year, you don't have to operate a product this year or a service or anything like that, you don't have clients to answer to, not external clients. We want you to sort of focus on the 3 to 5 year horizon for the business, or some special project, maybe with a 1 to 2 year horizon, but it's always something future looking. Right? So the strategy teams, and that's the work that I'm doing now and have been doing, is all focused on that kind of longer term thinking, right? So there's a lot of really interesting things in the world of payments, a lot of changes. My first project at MasterCard, interestingly, was how do we enter the China markets, the Chinese market. Now, we had a delay there because of the government. They kind of delayed the license for a while, but I was leading a team that helped to kind of map out from a value-added services perspective, what do clients even want, in that market? That's like really fun, right? So again, it's not one of these, hey, you have to sell X number of dollars this year or else we might not decide to employ you for another year. It's, like, let's step back and think about 3 to 5 years. What kind of business do we want to have in this particular area? How do we fix this problem? And then what do we need to do about it starting today, next year, and onward to make that happen? So that's kind of how a strategy function operates and what I've been working on.
That's amazing. I didn't know this before, but like being able to check the future is something really great. And I'm sure like in entrepreneurship, this is something that is really important and people will need to like understand like how exactly to enter into new markets like you do yourself. So, um, based on your experience, could you walk us through like, um, when it comes to decision making specifically, and entering new markets, like how do you make that decision? Say, like you try to enter from
Sure.
MasterCard into like China. So like why exactly China or like
Sure.
why exactly this specific country and how did that
Yeah,
happen?
well, at least in my pay grade, I'm not the one making those decisions. Those are usually made at a pay grade above me. So maybe someday that'll be me making that call. But typically, what happens, I think, is that we're asked to do, uh, these senior leaders, the executive leadership team of any company, the kind of think of the C-suite and maybe the people who report to the C-suite, like their life is just going from meeting to meeting to meeting. They have a very, very wide and diverse set of responsibilities of people that they need to be working with and report to. So they need people like me to kind of do some of the legwork, around this type of thing. So they would say, look, we think we're going to get, let's use the China, example. This is public information. I'm not allowed to share anything that's non-public information. I hope you all know that. So I have to be vague at times, but in this case, I necessarily need to be vague. We're obviously working with the government on a license to process domestic transactions, not just cross-border transactions, but domestic transactions within the company or within the country. And so what are some of the ways that we need to win, or what are some of the extra ways we can win besides just processing transactions through value-added services? Like that was the question that was essentially brought to us. And so we basically would, it wasn't our decision to work on that necessarily, but we then did all the legwork around it, and we bring back a set of recommendations to those senior leaders that says, hey, based on all of our research, here's our best thinking, around it. And now they can say, we don't want any of that thinking. They can say we want all of it. We can say, hey, let's just do some of those things. But that's essentially, we're the people who go and do the legwork, the deep research, present our findings, but then, it's obviously up to others as to whether they implement it, how they implement it. And it's always it's always a conversation, like it's not like there's a big reveal and then there's a thumbs up or thumbs down. No, it's a conversation. We present, here's the first part of our thinking. They give feedback. We go and we do another phase of work. We present that. Great. We like this. We're not sure about that. Let's explore this question. So it's an iterative conversation we're having with these folks.
And so there's gonna be a lot of negotiations and like back and forth, based on
Yeah.
what you're hearing.
Yeah.
Cool, okay,
I would say it's
amazing.
more collaboration than negotiation, but yes, I would
Okay.
agree.
Oh yes, also collaboration for sure. But I earlier you did mention like about research. So like, do you have anything you would recommend entrepreneurs go and research? Like, say I know like there's some platforms like Forbes or like
Yeah.
some China has a different type of system that you have to look into. So what would you recommend entrepreneurs look at when they start to like build their business and they're looking
Yeah.
at this market? Every single.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think for an entrepreneur, it's going to be perhaps a little bit different than someone like me who's really trying to kind of be the connective tissue between disparate parts of a very large and complex organization. Those are two very different sets of things. If you're starting your own business or trying to be an entrepreneur versus operating within a highly matrixed organization, like, I've when I joined MasterCard, it was only, I think, 16,000 people. And that was by far the smallest company that I worked for. It's over double that size now. So I've only ever worked in very large organizations. But I can say that there's a lot of publicly available information out there. I think some of the best places to go to for really digestible, readable things is like consultancies will often publish thought leadership pieces. If you, for example, if you go to Google and you just type in your topic and then follow it by white paper, there's probably a bunch of stuff that will come up. Now we have the advantage of large language models. I think Google Gemini's deep research large language model is excellent for this type of thing. It's not the full answer. I think it's actually only maybe 10 or 15% of the answer, but I think it will collect a lot of the best publicly available information on whatever topic that you're interested in. But by far, honestly, the best way to kind of get educated about any topic, any business plan or aspiration you have, is talking to people who are experts in it, right? I mean, that's like by far the best thing. So any of these projects, there are some exceptions, but by far the number of projects that I've done in my career begin with scheduling probably at least 20, if not 30, sometimes 40 and 45 different interviews with people from every single perspective. It could be the financial perspective, the legal perspective, the customer perspective, the product perspective, the technical perspective, the operational perspective. Like and then the regional perspectives. Sometimes you have to talk to each of these types of people in every region of the world. Like it's a 30-minute interview. Sometimes they go longer, but it's typically 30 minutes. You ask a bunch of questions, and by the time you're done with that, those 20, 30, 40 interviews, you really have a very well-balanced view of what some of the true problems are, what some of the true opportunities are. And so I would recommend to students, I do this all the time. I mean, look, yeah, search the internet, use Google, use large language models, read what's on the internet. That's great. But like the more that you can sit down and talk to your customers, talk to people who have done the type of thing that you've done, like that's where the richness and detail, I think, really, really pops out, at least for me anyway.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like finding mentors and finding the people that are in your specific niche is really important, especially for me. Like I'm an accounting major. I had to like speak to a lot of people and have a lot of copy chats. And now like compared to before speaking to these people, um, speaking to these professionals, I learned like a lot more about accounting, why I
Well, it's a game
specifically
changer.
like it. Exactly. So
Yeah,
it's definitely better to like experience it firsthand, like have people talk to you and just find like mentors that like are really helpful and everything like that.
absolutely.
Okay. So earlier we were just speaking about like your experience and thank you so much for that tidbit. But since you have worked in multiple like 500 Fortune companies, um, what can you tell us that's different about these financial services, and how does working at different companies broaden our knowledge? Like maybe entrepreneurs, like students ourselves should start off in like a company and just like learn from them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've worked in really two different industries because financial services is a very, very broad umbrella term. But and I've, obviously Goldman Sachs neatly falls into the category of financial services, especially corporate financial services. With payments, it's a little with MasterCard and American Express that fits a little bit more tidily into still under the broad umbrella of financial services, but it's more the payments industry. It's almost like a payments network or a diversified financial services, something like that. It's when I went to Goldman, for example, in the interview process, probably the biggest thing I had to overcome was convincing them that I knew about financial services because I didn't come from financial services in the way that they thought of financial services, and going to MasterCard, I don't think people thought, oh, he's bringing knowledge of financial services from his Goldman experience. I don't think that was because there's such very, very different industries. Now, had I worked in, let's say, the consumer bank on the Marcus card at Goldman, there would have been a much neater tie-in and so forth. So there's some parts of overlap, but broadly speaking, these are two very, very different kinds of industries, at least in my perspective anyway. Obviously, they're closer than, let's say, pharmaceuticals or aviation would be, but you get the idea.
Mhm.
So I do think though that working in different industries is useful because you can see that things happen differently other places. I think for me the best perspective honestly is just culture. That different companies have different cultures. Amex is all three places I have a lot of really positive things to say about. Amex can be it's a yeah, perhaps a slower moving company because they really, really drive consensus there in a meaningful way. They want to make sure that everyone's on board with something. Goldman tends to be more a little bit more hierarchical, a little bit more formal, a little bit more buttoned up, so to speak. MasterCard really values, for a large organization, I think it moves pretty fast. It tends to be quite agile because the needs of the industry are so fast moving that they just have to be very, agile. Probably I work a little bit harder than at MX and a little bit less than at Goldman, so work-life balance is a little bit different at all these places. But I think it just gives you a sense of, hey, the world's a big place and there are lots of different types of companies, there are different types of jobs. It makes you grateful sometimes for what you have, because you realize maybe it isn't this way everywhere else. Maybe it also gives you a sense of, hey, I can change if I need to. This isn't the only game in town. I don't have to spend my career in this industry if I want to change. So I think this is a obviously broad strokes response to your answer, but I do think there's value in it. That said, I think there are notable examples where people have switched industries that are very, very different from one another and been successful. But I think broadly speaking, people tend to really succeed when they stay maybe not in exactly the same function or the same industry, but kind of in the same vein, for most of their careers. Because then there's a stacking, there's an exponential multiplier effect that tends to accrue to you based on your knowledge and connections. That's really great, So but it's again, everyone has their own path, I would say, but I do think it brings some good perspective.
Course, I feel like for sure, even in entrepreneurship, like being able to stay inside this one niche, like you can't say you're working at a restaurant, you can't just go and open an accounting firm.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
being able to like really collect that expertise is something that will bring value to you when you want to open more restaurants, say, or like when you want to open more accounting firms. You can't jump from like something totally different. But thank you so much for that piece. And um finally, like I want to know like more about your teaching, because you're like highly rated. I know like Mark, one of your students, he said you're amazing. Professor Rastan also said you're an amazing professor. So like,
It's very kind.
yeah. So how do you do that? Like, yeah, just how do you do it? And what exactly would you say is your special, unique trait?
Yeah. I mean, it's very kind of your colleagues to say that. And that's my goal is that people feel that way after they've taken the course. So that's reassuring that at least two people feel that way. So maybe, I don't know what my batting average is. I don't know what the denominator is, but or the numerator and the denominator, but that's nice. I don't know what other professors are like, but I'll tell you what I kind of strive to do, at least in my class, that I hope makes a difference. Number one, I think is, as always with even with business, by the way, but just with anything, is really knowing your audience, and really understanding like who you're in the room with, right? What their core needs are, and look, I've been through this as well. I've gone through multiple seasons of trying to figure things out, and feeling a little lost, candidly, and not really sure where to go, what to do, and kind of wanting to have a plan, maybe having a plan and realizing, oh, I got to scrap that plan, start a new plan. And, and that is just a very, anxious time of life. Now, in some ways, college years are an amazing time of life. Like, you have so much fun with friends and you have typically great health, and you're just like all these wonderful things. You only have to take care of yourself. I've got 3 young kids. So like my life is indentured to the needs of my kids for the most part. Back when I didn't have kids, I could go out the door when I wanted to go out the door. It was amazing. Like, so there's all these great things about where you are at this stage, but there are some really anxiety producing things, particularly around, what's the career going to be? A lot of times people, fret about, I was the same way, like, oh, am I going to have a romantic partner? What kind of romantic partner should I have? What's, will they call me back? All these kinds of things, like these are common concerns, right?
Life
So,
struggles.
pardon?
Life struggles.
Yeah, life struggles, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that just knowing your audience, that you're with a set of people who are perhaps experiencing those anxieties, whether at a low or a high level, they're experiencing those, and they want to find their way through it. And so if I can, speak to that, if I can talk about things through that lens of not so much, hey, this is how you do this math formula and get this correct answer, but rather like, here's how to prepare yourself for your life and your career. Like, that's really, and here's some tools that are going to help you to do that. That's why we, spend time in the course talking about interviewing skills and, resume building skills, networking skills. I try to intersperse a lot of my classes with stories of life, because honestly, at least I had no idea what corporate life was like until I got there. I had some ideas, probably from movies or from like one story here or there or whatever, but it was totally wrong. It was like totally wrong, So like, and it's much less dramatic than in these films, and so forth. No one's like screaming, "You're fired," and, throwing your briefcase out into the hall. Like, nobody does that, like that's just ridiculous. So there's, I try to like layer in stories of times when I was successful, times when I failed or struggled, because that's all part of it. So I think understanding people, why people are there. I also try to do a lot of, uh, case studies as well. About 2/3 of my class sessions are built around case studies, and the goal there is because I think that case studies are essentially situations. And what's your career? It's a series of situations, right? It's just a situation, that situation, and everything has multiple dimensions to it. It's not a multiple choice test. It's not an essay. There's multiple things you have to think through, and you're always operating under uncertainty, which the case studies really bring that to the fore, that there's a lot of uncertainty all the time. And how do you work through that? I try to be energetic, because if I'm not energetic, I don't know anyone else who will be energetic, and so I try to focus stuff on things that I think are valuable for students, but also candidly kind of interesting to me, because, that will make it, more exciting for me. And then I think the, undergirding all this is, we have a sense when there's I think an assumption that when you're communicating publicly, one of the keys to getting your audience to listen is to be likable. And I think there's something to that, but actually the more important aspect is not so much getting your audience to like you, but communicating to your audience that you like them, right? And so when I sit with when I not sit when I stand in front of students, I'm genuinely happy to be with them. I actually do like them. I do like you. I am really happy to be with you that night, and I'm excited about something cool that could happen. Yes, there are some annoying students, but that's a small percentage. And so then I just move on. I say the large percentage of students here are ones that I really, really enjoy being with and talking with and being in a classroom with. And so I hope anyway that students feel that I actually do like them. And that makes it a more positive experience as well. I think we've all had a professor in our lives. I'm not talking about any, Baruch professors. I candidly have never been in a classroom with another Baruch professor, so I can't have any firsthand knowledge. But I know I've had professors where I'm like, you don't even want to be here. Like it's obvious you don't even want to be here. So why would I be excited about this class if I can tell you don't want to be in the room, with us? So I think that's those are some of the things that come to mind.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like for sure, like you're like a great professor based off like our conversation ourselves. I feel like you definitely like have that passion and you like really would help the students and you're for the
Thank you.
students.
Thank you.
So really appreciate that. And
Yeah.
like even
And
coming
if I
from
could add
this,
one more thing on this,
you
sorry
can.
to interrupt you.
No,
I think that undergirding all this is just a very tactical thing, which doesn't just apply to teaching, but I think is just a great thing for students to keep in mind overall is just be prepared, right? When I step in front of a room full of students, I typically feel quite at ease, but I feel at ease because I'm prepared, like I know what I'm going to do, in that block of time we have together. And I think one of the things that I've learned in my life is that action absorbs anxiety, So when I feel anxious about something, whether it's a job interview, whether it's a big deliverable at work, whether it's stepping in front of a set of students, if I take action on that, if I prepare for that, it doesn't mean that my anxiety goes away entirely. It doesn't mean that there's something that won't surprise me in a negative way. That's always possible, of course, but my level of anxiety goes way down, right? So I think also I like to think that my students would perceive me as prepared because I've thought a lot about what we're going to do together and what questions I'm going to ask and where we're going to take the conversation. I don't have notes in front of me, but I'm definitely not winging it. I know where I want to go with time. So that's another thing as well.
that's amazing. Yeah, definitely being prepared. Like interviews anywhere in general, it's so hard to be prepared. But earlier you did mention a lot about like being passionate and also like storytelling is really important. Like
Huge.
being able to be personable and like really like geared towards your audience, even in entrepreneurship, even in life in general, like that is a really important, like tangible skill to have. And so
Agreed.
you really have it going good.
Thank you.
So last question, because I know you have a lot going on. You're working in corporate strategy at MasterCard and you're also an adjunct professor in like two schools, Columbia and Baruch. I'm not sure if you're still doing it at Columbia, but I'm for sure you're doing it at Baruch. So how exactly do you define the success and what do you recommend young people to do to strive for this success?
Yeah. And when you say success, are you referring to kind of when you get to the end of your life, what are the things you're going to feel? How are you going to think about success? Is that what you mean? Or is it more so like, what are the habits I should be forming, that will lead me to success? What's the lens there? Just so I'm clear.
So just like basically where where do you define success? Like how would you feel like you're finally fulfilled or like your life,
Yeah.
it's great and
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I know you have children, so like I feel like if I had children and everything and I had like grandkids and everything, I would be like, oh my God, I made it in life. So like, things like
Well, I,
that.
I will, the best framework that I've run across, I've done a fair amount of kind of reading exploration about some of the science behind happiness and well-being and so forth. And the best kind of framework that I've looked at, people say I want to be happy, but what is happy exactly? Or what does it mean to be happy? And you break it into three parts, or happiness researchers really think of it through three lenses. There's pride, pleasure, and purpose. And I think that's a really useful framework for people to think about it. And I like to think about my own life in that way. So pride, I think, is a sense of accomplishment, right? It's like I've done something. I've become a really good version of myself, and I've, you know, done some things that I look back on. I'm like, wow, that wasn't easy, but I did it, and I'm really happy about that. And so, and that can be a variety of things. It doesn't have to be a professional lens, of course, but something you've kind of built in some way. And that earlier in my life, I was very, very prestige driven. I wanted to work for name brand companies, and I wanted to achieve certain titles and certain income thresholds. And, I'm probably, certainly haven't achieved the greatest of my aspirations, but I've done okay, so I'm at a certain point, I think probably when I made vice president at Goldman, I kind of said, you know what, I think there's not only marginal utility to sort of continuing this prestige status ladder. I think there's not a lot more there. But I certainly want to do well, and I think there's a real pride that comes from doing excellent work, and so I strive to just do really good quality work. The people, when they work with me, they have a sense, wow, I'm glad I worked with Cory versus somebody else. Like that's what I strive for. So I think success through that lens, you probably, if you're a student at Baruch, you have a bit of an itch, if not a really big itch, to go out and accomplish and, conquer, slay some dragons, summit some mountains, and look, go do that. I think that's a great itch to have. And so go do it. I don't think it's the only itch you should have for over the course of your life, but I think it's an important one. And so go do it, climb that mountain, get the resume, that you're going to feel like, wow, that's awesome. I never thought I could do this. That's pretty cool. Like go get that, and there's a whole, it's a grind. It's a grind. You got to put habits in place, and you need a little bit of luck, and you got to do all the things and just keep swinging away, but it'll come, right? So that's pride. And then I think there's a second one, pleasure, which I think we're all sort of aware of. It's the wonderful laugh fests with friends. It's, hobbies that really engage you, the walks in nature or sports games or whatever it is that sort of just brings you that kind of wonderful pleasure, and for me, I think that being with my close and dear friends and having wonderful times with them, that's a meaningful thing for me, and then there's purpose, where you sort of give back, and it's not about you, it's about contributing to the lives of others. Obviously I get that through my kids, but I also get that through teaching, and I get through, some other means as well. But I think there's a sense of, hey, I'm creating value for other people, and I'm giving back to the world, especially to people who can't give back to me, because you know what, my life is full of people who gave to me when I didn't have anything to give to them, and people who sat down, uh, you know, people who sat down with me and had coffee, went on walks with me, and I was able to be a mess, and they helped me to figure that out and cheered for me and told me harsh truths about myself that I didn't want to hear, but needed to hear, and all those kinds of things, right? So I have a lot of people who have invested in me, and to a sense of purpose to do that for others in one way or another, is meaningful. Again, it can look very different for people. Maybe folks do it exclusively through the family. Maybe they do it through altruism. There's all sorts of different ways, but I think finding ways to give back. So as I think about success, especially if you define it broadly, I think about the pride, pleasure, and purpose. And those things will probably change over the course of your life, the balance of how you seek those things. Maybe you're in certain chapters of life where maybe pleasure is very important. Some chapters of life where it's like, hey, I just got to buckle down and focus on pride and building accomplishment. And some areas of life where, hey, purpose is going to be my primary, goal right now. And obviously I think you should mix all three in, at any given time, but there's going to be times when maybe one task comes to the fore. So that's how I define it, but if ultimately, if I had to do it in just a one-liner, I would probably go with what Warren Buffett says, which is, he says, success is if the people you love, love you back.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it's a pretty good way of putting it, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. I really think that it's really inspiring, like purpose, pleasure, and pride. They're all like valuable points, especially in
Absolutely.
life. And just being able to attain that is something everyone would like. And I think that would drive motivation for anyone who wants to accomplish one goal or like they want to go out and party or something like that. So thank you so much for taking the time to come in today and giving us so much insight and everything like that. So really appreciate it. And
Absolutely.
is there
Thank you
anything
for the
else that you
invitation.
would like to share or anything like that before we cut it up?
Great question. I think there's the one of the things that I say to my students at the end of every semester, and that I guess I can share here is, you know, this comes back to the point I made about just being an anxious time and an uncertain time for a lot of students, and you're really trying to make your way in the world. And one thing that even though I didn't go to Baruch, I feel like I share a sense of that a lot of students have of maybe not coming from the a pedigree of business, or feeling like an underdog sometimes. And I definitely have felt that for years, even way beyond just a 4-year period. And but I think that you need a little bit of luck in life, as anyone does. But look, you know if you're intelligent and hardworking, you figure it out. Like, intelligent, hardworking people figure it out, and if you're Baruch, you have reasonable amount of intelligence, if not a great amount of intelligence, right? And hopefully you've got the work ethic that can support that, and if you have those two things, it may not happen for you on the time frame you hope for or in exactly the way that you anticipate, but at some point you are going to figure out what that niche is. And that's obviously, our lives are always changing and adapting and so forth. But all the anxieties you have about whether or not you're going to quote unquote make it or do well or whatever, like that's going to happen. If you're intelligent and hardworking, those people always figure it out, right? Um, if you want to stay in your basement and watch Netflix all day, life will be hard for you. Okay. But, if you're putting yourself out there and you're really working on developing great habits, trying lots of things, and you're smart enough, I mean, at least in my opinion, there's no better time in human history to be intelligent and hardworking than right now, so I think, our economy, the way things are set up is heavily biased in favor of people who are intelligent and hardworking, so I think things will happen in a good way.
Like as you mentioned, like even I feel like anyone outside of Baruch, they can tell like Baruch students, our community, we're all hardworking, we're all like putting in this effort. And you can tell just by like seeing around like the plaza and when people are tabling and just like even myself, like I felt like when I got to be a part of the Baruch community, I was like, wow, I'm so grateful that I chose Baruch as my college. And
That's
like
great.
now it's like we have so much opportunity here and you know how we became like the top college for like
Hmm.
the
Really, I love
college
seeing that.
best value college. So yeah, it's amazing. And thank you so much for today. I hope you have a
Thank
wonderful
you,
day
Nicole.
and appreciate all the insights. Here with me is Professor Cory Labanow. My name is Nicole Tan. This is CEO Unplugged. I hope you all enjoyed listening today and we'll see you next time.